Well, welcome back to We Hold the Keys podcast. I am Jessie Ebner, and this is Bree Algetz, Signature Properties Ebner and Associates in Crested, Butte,
Colorado.
And it's not Crested Butte, it's Crested Butte. Have you ever had, just side note, people call salespeople and like, I'm calling you, are you in Crested Butte? And you're like, there's an E, it's Crested Butte.
I know.
Okay, off topic.
Or you spell where you live and they're like, okay, Crested Butte.
Yeah.
I'm like, no,
it's
that'd
Butte.
B-U-T-T.
Butte. All right,
Okay,
we are
onward.
way off track.
Yep.
So today we're talking about brokerage duties and, you know, our relationships with our clients and commissions and how the Colorado Real Estate Commission kind of has outlines for us that how we're supposed to represent our clients and the things that we should do no matter what for each client.
Right.
So I'll let you take over from here.
Okay. So I think one of the first things I'd like to talk about is that buyer's agents don't work for free.
Right.
Which
There is
I think,
a misnomer about that.
yes, I think oftentimes that's how people advertise themselves, or I think sometimes
So
members
a lot of
the-
buyer's agents advertise themselves.
Right. And that's how members of the public, I think, often feel is that buyer's agents work for free.
Yep.
But I think what some people, the public, don't remember is that co-op commission that is offered is actually what is, how that buyer's agent is getting paid.
Yes.
And, let's say you're working and there are cases where the seller is not willing to offer some sort of commission to the buyer, like a for sale by owner, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But as a buyer, I grew up in real estate, so obviously I wouldn't do a transaction without being represented. I represent myself, of course, but for someone else, I think you would want representation. So I think in those cases, they can choose to pay their buyer's agent who represents them.
Yep.
And that kind of brings me to think about the difference between having a buyer's agent versus having a transaction broker.
Which, do you want to explain that? Because I think that's very confusing for people. And
It is.
We are one of the only states that allows transaction brokerage. There's not a lot of states that allow that.
Right, and some states offer dual agency. So you could have a case where you have the listing, you also have the buyer, and you're representing both parties as agency, which I think would be interesting. That's how it was in Illinois, but I never actually was licensed in Illinois. I just always worked as an assistant. So, but the easiest way I describe it, or what I like to think about, is if you have a transaction broker, you have a referee, and if you hire someone as an agent, they're your coach, which kind of brings
An
us
advocate.
to then their advocate,
Yep.
right? And that's kind of the contract with the brokerage duties laid out, or the uniform duties, as the commission likes to refer to them as.
Yep. Well, I think we should back up and say, let's just talk about the history of Colorado too, because originally when real estate started becoming really popular, there weren't enough attorneys in the state of Colorado to manage the contracts. So
Not enough attorneys.
I know. The Colorado Real Estate Commission said, well, why don't we write these contracts and give them licenses to allow them to negotiate and prepare these contracts as not being attorneys.
Right.
And that has led to the Conway-Bogue?
The Conway-Bogue decision, and basically that's what it was allowing real estate licensees to act as attorneys without actually having an attorney's license. And that is why it's so important that we do have the Real Estate Commission, because they write all the forms for us and we can only complete those forms. So we don't have the authority to go and make up some other form, nor do we have the authority to advise our client on a form they've been given. Let's say somebody buys a builder home and the builder has their own contract.
Yes. We cannot
Technically
prepare those.
speaking, we can't prepare them and we can't educate our client on them because they weren't prepared by the commission.
Right.
So, which is why too, when clients see the contracts and the font, like the portion that we've completed is in a different color, it's generally italicized, it's a different font type.
Right. Yeah.
what
It
that's
stands
called?
out though.
It stands
There's
out.
only certain sections of the contract that we can make any changes to. Everything else is uniform no matter what.
Right.
And so one of the reasons we want to talk about this is because there's this idea out there that there's discounted brokerages or discounted agents that will work for a flat rate or a flat fee. And some people think that means you just enter it into the MLS and you forget it and you don't really do any more work because you're technically not really getting paid to do anything else. But the reality is the Colorado Real Estate Commission requires every agent has to perform the uniform duties.
Right.
That's that are listed
minimum
in
standard.
the minimum standards. And there are, 16
think
uniform
about- yeah.
duties of an agent, which they include, we have it sitting here, performing the terms of any written or oral agreement with the seller, presenting all offers to and from the seller in a timely manner, disclosing to seller adverse material facts actually known by the broker, et cetera, et cetera. So every agent, no matter what relationship they enter into, no matter how much they're getting paid for the transaction, are held to these brokerage duties, uniform duties.
And I think it's important for the public to understand that, so they ensure that, and if they're paying a broker 1%, great, but they need to ensure that they're getting all of at least those minimum duties. And I have seen in the past where certain clients or brokers will say, well, what if we redline these items and I won't do those? Well, that's illegal.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
We will, as a realtor, you get punished from the Colorado Real Estate Commission for potentially doing something like that. So we are held to a standard that every agent should follow along to, but not everyone does.
Right.
And that's why you've got to work with agents that know what they're doing, that understand the contract, and respect that you're paying for the value that they add and the knowledge and the fact that they're working for you.
That actually brings me to, I was visiting a friend on the Front Range, and they're in the process of trying to sell. They actually own 2 homes on the Front Range. One is a rental, one they live in currently, but they're moving to a different state. And she was telling me that they hired a company that was I think it was a 1%. And she said they thought, great, this market.
1% commission.
1% commission, sorry, thank you. And, in their eyes as sellers, they were like, great, the market is hot. We have a great property. It's new. It'll sell. And unfortunately, it sat on the market. And then, as we know, sometimes this market is moving so quickly that I think sometimes if something sits for even 3 or 4 weeks, I feel like it's automatic, like, well, what's wrong with it? And
You're right,
it's like,
which
well,
is
there's
so
not
crazy.
necessarily something wrong with it. It's just properties used to sit for 2 and 3 years.
Yeah.
And people wouldn't question what was wrong with it. So it's just interesting. But so they hired the agency for the 1%, and then that house, it didn't move. So they actually decided they're going to sell their other home, and they did end up meeting with a broker. And I think that broker charges 3%. And
6% total? Or
6% total, yes,
Yep.
thank you. And she was like, I was floored. She said, I understand we're paying an additional 5% at this point, but she said, look at this marketing presentation that he left, and we just feel so much more confident that we have someone that is going to provide all of these duties for us and not just be a listing agent and put it on the MLS and,
Right. There's just so much more.
Some of
that
these you can still
agents do.
provide, but you can provide these can be provided at a really high level.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was interesting hearing from her, because when they first told me they were hiring this brokerage, I didn't say anything, because if that's what someone wants to choose,
Yeah. More power to you.
more power to them. Exactly. It's the same thing when someone lists with someone else. It's like, I hope, I want the best for them. Obviously, they're friends of mine. So it was just interesting when she said that extra 5% is really going to be worth it.
It is worth it. It is very much worth it. There's a lot of value into hiring an agent that is very competent in the market and can help you get through it. And you're going to make more money in the end than you would if you had a reduced commission. Like, even the money you think you're going to save by reducing your commission, you're actually going to lose in the price. You end up, oh my gosh, your net proceeds at the end of the day. So,
well, I think it's the same thing with people that try to do for sale by owner. Do they know the legalities of the contracts and what everything looks like in order to try to do it themselves? And oftentimes you do statistically see, NAR does a survey every couple years, and they talk about how for sale by owners on average definitely lose percentage.
Yeah, you leave money on the table for sure, because you're not putting your property out to the masses where you, and you know, when I list a property, I mean, I am like calling everyone and keeping up all the other agents, like, oh, we've got some activity, there's a showing happening, like you're working really hard to bring the activity, and then it's a lot of work to be a listing agent, to manage the phone calls in this market, and to have a seller at FSBO take that on themselves. I think they end up being pretty overwhelmed, and then they just get over it, and they're like, fine, no, just stop calling me here, I'll just take this contract.
Right.
You know?
And then they are, they're leaving money on the table.
It's frustrating. I mean, realtors are kind of bossy, and we, when there's and especially like with
bossy
for sale by owner, you end up getting calls. I mean, I've seen it on like Zillow when you have a for sale by owner listed. It's like, realtors, do not call me. I'm not going to list with you.
I know.
Because everybody calls them. But
got it.
Anyway, it's important to understand. I think, especially if you're just learning about real estate at all in general, or if you're thinking about becoming a buyer or a seller and you're thinking about how to sell your home, it's really important to understand how Colorado Real Estate Commission works and how we are obligated to perform uniform duties. And it's all
And you can call
negotiable in
agents
contracts.
and interview them. You can ask questions. You can have conversations. I mean,
Yeah.
professionals like to be questioned.
Yes.
You know, and when I think about reduced commission, I think, you know, if I was going to get LASIK eye surgery, for example, I'm probably not going to go find the discount
the
option.
cheapest person to work on my eyeballs. It's not going to
Walk
work.
around blind in one eye.
It's really true. And the same, I mean, real estate is your highest asset. And
Yes.
to hire someone that doesn't know how to handle that, your asset, like your best asset,
best
and
asset.
your best investment is scary.
Yeah, you want to
And-
put someone in charge that gets it.
Yeah.
And I think also one thing I want to point out is with the, you know, the buyer's agents don't work for free. You know, I think sometimes people think, well, then the seller is paying that. And in a sense, yes, right?
Right.
But the
who's
seller
bringing money
gets
to
to
the
price
table?
the seller gets to price their home where they choose. And I think it's important for sellers to remember they can classify those things how they want, and they need to take those things into consideration because the buyer is the one paying.
Right. Ultimately, the
at
buyer
end.
brings the money.
Right.
And so really the buyer's paying the commission if you think about it that way. Like
You can, yeah, you
I mean,
can look about it all
it's
sorts
part
of
of the listing
ways,
contract,
so-
but the buyer's the one bringing the money to the table. So
Totally.
anyway, we could talk all day about that.
Right?
to be continued. But we'll see where we pick up next week.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.